Being a mom can be tough. My son was hit by a car while riding his tricycle. He was pretty banged up, but at the hospital, they told us he would be okay. He left with brain damage, and the doctors didn't tell us they caused it. But our law firm discovered the truth. Success will never come easy for my son, but thanks to our lawyers, he achieves it one day at a time.
Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines of this tragic brain damage case caused by incompetent and negligent doctors, and how Jerry Myers and Paul Giuffre, two of Pennsylvania's top trial lawyers, used their extensive legal experience and in-house medical staff to discover how a doctor's negligence and incompetence escalated a simple bruises and scrapes injury into permanent brain damage to an innocent child. Every day, somewhere in America, more than 300 innocent men, women, and children become victims of medical malpractice at the hands of incompetent and negligent doctors. Last year, over 98,000 victims were killed by doctors. More than 4 million victims are permanently injured each year. And remember, the next time you go to your doctor or the hospital, this could happen to you.
Being a mom can be tough. My son was hit by a car while riding his tricycle. He was pretty banged up, but at the hospital, they told us he would be okay. He left with brain damage, and the doctors didn't tell us they caused it.
Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at the law firm of Myers, Giuffre, Evans, and Schwartzwalder. It's my great pleasure to introduce Jerry Myers and Paul Giuffre to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Glad to be here, thank you.
Our audience wants to know a little bit about, why you guys do what you do. You're lawyers. We don't want to say you specialize in anything, but you do happen to have a lot of medical malpractice cases. Jerry, give us a little of your background and why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, I was a Navy corpsman and then a Marine corpsman and then a respiratory therapist for a number of years. I guess that's where I became interested in how to prevent medical injuries, because I saw a lot of my patients needlessly suffer.
Right.
Realized I couldn't do anything about it internally, decided to go to law school.
Right. Now, you also, Paul, handle a lot of medical malpractice cases. What interests you most about them?
Well, unlike Jerry, I had no medical background. I was a trial lawyer. That's what I wanted to do. I started my career as a prosecutor, but after I left public service, what I started to realize was that this was an area where I could make an impact on individuals' lives.
Mm-hmm.
People have been devastated by their injuries. They feel betrayed by the medical community. They had nowhere to turn.
Right.
And I realized that I could use my skills in the courtroom to help these people solve the problems that doctors had created in their lives.
Before we get into this particular case, which was a very unfortunate case, I would like both of you to talk, probably you, Jerry, about emcare, why we can't identify the client, and talk specifically about the doctors, the hospitals, and that sort of thing. Tell us why, in this state.
Well, emcare was created by our legislature in Pennsylvania in 2003, but before emcare, in 1975, there was a prior act, and then it was called the CAT Fund, Catastrophe Loss Fund, but they are both the same organization. They provide for excess liability coverage for doctors. It was thought back in the 70s, and it continued to be a problem, they said, for doctors to get inexpensive medical insurance for excess coverage. So the state provided it. The doctors fund it, they pay for all of it. The doctors pay for it, the hospitals pay for it. However, This agency in the late 70s and early 80s decided that they were going to require confidentiality as a condition of any monetary resolution of a claim.
Mm-hmm. And what is the drawback of that?
Well, we see terrible things happen. We conduct investigations, sometimes for years, using tools the state doesn't have available to them to conduct an investigation. These investigations could benefit the public. We would be able to explain how a thing happened, who did it, why it happened. And then we aren't allowed to, and our clients aren't allowed to either. So we're basically forced to accept solving the client's problem as a substitute for being able to help solve the society's problem, and I don't think it's a fair exchange.
There are some doctors in hospitals that continually have problems, and the public is not made aware of this because of emcare, right?
Well, in fact, there are system problems, not just individual doctors. The way people have of interacting, warehousing people, for example, in an emergency department, instead of having the doctor come and see a person when they're admitted to that doctor's service. That kind of a problem is a system problem, and we have cases where that's caused horrible devastation.
You had spoken earlier, before the show, about problems that you had with tracheal tubes.
Oh, yes.
And this case is a realization of your actual passion, because it is a case where a child was struck by a car, brought into the hospital, scrapes and bruises, but it evolved into something else. Tell our audience what happened here.
Well, this was a young child who is dragged by a car. He's struck by a car while he's on a tricycle. And the car drags him a couple hundred feet and parks. The driver of the car, a teenager, goes out to tell his father he thinks something's wrong with the car. He doesn't even realize that there's a child that he has done this to. Remarkably, the child had injuries, but none of them were life-threatening. He had bruises, he had tissue that was torn, he had some burns, but he was a kid who was basically a miracle. Yeah. He was going to walk away from this incredible thing without any problems, but he was admitted to a hospital. They decided to put him on a ventilator and paralyze him because they didn't want him to move.
Chemically paralyzed.
Yeah, they chemically paralyzed him. Mm-hmm. The problem with chemical paralysis, of course, is it doesn't make you unconscious. If you haven't sedated someone significantly at a time they're paralyzed, it's pretty terrifying for them, but they can't say anything. This is a way of making a kid shut up.
Yeah.
You know? They can't move, they can't talk, they're paralyzed, but it doesn't prevent them from, for example, experiencing the terror of suffocation. And that's what happened. Because the day after he was admitted, while he was still on a ventilator, paralyzed chemically, some doctors who were there to do a procedure bumped the ventilator. They didn't mean to. Our case had nothing to do with them having done that. What it had to do with is that when they bumped him, they caused the airway that was in him to become dislodged. And when it was dislodged, he could not breathe for himself because he was paralyzed. And he suffocated to a hypotensive and eventually cardiac standstill state.
As a result of him not being able to breathe by himself, what happened, Paul?
Well, as a result of him not being able to breathe, the most serious thing that happened to this child was he suffered a brain injury, a serious brain injury, and began within a few days suffering seizures. The tragedy of the case, obviously, is what happened to the child. The shame of the case is that the parents knew none of this. They knew nothing about this incident where he was unable to breathe or their child was suffocating. It wasn't told to them.
And I also understand one of the safeguards on the ventilator was they have alarms. The alarms have been shut off on the ventilator. So it couldn't alert anybody, correct?
Well, there are alarms not only on the ventilator, but he was also attached to a pulse oximeter. This is a device that measures oxygen saturation in the blood. You set it high so that if it falls below the normal level, there is an alarm that's enunciated. So we have both ventilator alarms, and we have a pulse oximeter, and we have a child whose airway has been dislodged, who is paralyzed and not breathing, and yet there is no response in the records. I think it was that there was a 10-minute period between the time that they began this procedure where they disconnected him unintentionally from the ventilator and anyone recognizing it. But even when they recognized it, the nurses just watched him. They watched the pulse fall to 39. A child with a pulse of 39 doesn't have any blood pressure at all. Absent blood pressure, absent oxygen, brain damage.
Right, and the parents were nearby, weren't they?
They were with him throughout his hospital stay.
But they wouldn't explain anything to the parents, would they?
No, they did not. In fact, what they led the parents to believe was that another incident near the end of the child's admission, where he accidentally extubated himself, may have been the cause of his problems, still not letting them know about this earlier event.
So there's a cover-up here.
Yes.
It appears that way.
How do you prevent ventilator-related deaths and injuries? What is the smart thing to do?
I think there are statistics out there saying that close to 65% of the time one of these mishaps occur with a ventilator, it's because someone has failed to properly use these alarm systems. Right. And we mentioned, systemic problems. Jerry, earlier in his career, had another incident very similar at this same hospital. And we know of another incident at this same hospital.
Same hospital.
Yes.
And unfortunately, emcare is preventing the public knowing what hospital it is, and you can't say, I understand that. And emcare is preventing the public from maybe choosing that hospital also, and maybe exposing themselves to danger too, right? The systemic problem is not being solved. Let me ask you this. Within the medical community, if you have repetitive mistakes at the same hospital or with the same doctor, what is the medical community doing to correct these problems?
Nothing.
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 How long can a doctor get away with being incompetent and negligent, or a hospital get away with being incompetent and negligent and not solving some real serious medical problems?
A doctor can spend his entire career doing this. There is nothing, or very rarely, he'll be stopped.
Drugs. If a doctor's on drugs, if a doctor is having sex with a patient, this will result in very prompt licensure problems. But right. You mean just because someone has died or had their life ruined, that's not apparently a basis for discipline?
What was the extent of the damage to the child?
The child suffered a number of sequelae to his brain injury. The most serious or life-altering for him was cortical blindness.
So the child can't see now?
Well, one of the challenges in this case was going to be how to make our adversaries understand this child's injury and how we would present this to the jury. Because though it's termed cortical blindness, there's nothing wrong with his eye. Mm-hmm. The eye still sees. Think of the eye as a camera, it's still taking a picture.
Yes.
The problem is the cortex of the brain, where those images sent by the eye are translated, if you will. That's what was not working on this child.
So is the child today able to function pretty normally, or what?
Well, he's functioning much better, probably much better than was expected, but that's largely because we were able to resolve the case for him, and the dedication of his family, and the treatment and rehabilitation that he's had since the case is resolved. He's made great strides, but he will never lead a normal life.
In discussing some of the other cases that your firm has handled, I understand that part of your ability to solve problems and get, satisfactory remedies, if you will, for your clients is your extensive discovery process, your extensive investigative medical experience, where you're able to uncover all the BS that the doctors or the hospitals may be throwing out there to protect themselves, correct? How did you do it in this case?
Well, I think it would be worth discussing the carbon monoxide issue as an example of BS.
Okay.
Well, we mentioned how there was a bit of a cover-up. I mean, there was one note that made a reference to the procedure during which the endotracheal tube became dislodged. So, first instance, Jerry found that, recognized the meaning of that, which gave us sort of a foothold in the case. But when we talk about BS, the defense used in this case, or one of the defenses, was that perhaps this child's injury came from carbon monoxide poisoning. Someone got the idea a car was involved. Cars produce carbon monoxide, ergo, this must be carbon monoxide poisoning.
So where's the carbon monoxide coming from?
The exhaust pipe, but not in a car that's turned off. And this one was turned off when it came to a stop. So you had the couple hundred yards of travel when the wind would have been carrying it far away from the child since he was in front of the car.
But they were able to hire so-called experts who opined, gave the opinion that this child suffered carbon monoxide poisoning. They neglected the basic facts of the case and all of the witness testimony that the car was immediately turned off. Witnesses spoke to the child. He was alert, oriented, answering questions appropriately for a child his age immediately. The car was jacked up off of him. And by the way, we used the term drag, but he was under the front end of the vehicle. This was not a child anywhere near the exhaust pipe of the vehicle.
This case, did it go to trial or was settled before it went to trial?
It was settled.
Yeah.
It was settled, but it was on the eve of trial that it was settled. I mean, we had to acquire a ventilator of the same type that the hospital had used on the child, so that we would be able to demonstrate to the jury the sound.
Yes.
Because it's very easy for people to talk about alarms. It's quite a different thing to be sitting in a courtroom and have the actual device make a very loud noise.
It's a big alarm.
It's a big noise. It's a very, incidentally, also a very unpleasant noise. It's not the kind of noise that you're supposed to be able to listen to very long without feeling very uncomfortable. That's these alarms. So we had that. We got it on eBay and eventually donated that to, I think, a hospital in India.
Right. In a lot of your cases, you have such overwhelming evidence before you go to trial that the other side realizes that it might not look good for them, correct?
Yes, that's why the cases end up being resolved. But regrettably, the resolution of the case, so we're able to solve our clients' problems. Others who suffer similar problems are not benefited, except in the hospital. One thing that does happen, I think, one value to what we do, is that where the event occurs, we make a huge impact. The event is far less likely to occur there, although...
where in this area, specific area of the hospital?
Well, no, not just there. They talk. They talk. Oh, it's the talk of the hospital. Yes. No, it gets circulated pretty widely.
Everybody watching this show, knows somebody that might have been affected, or maybe, let's say, is not sure of the medical treatment that they may have gotten from a doctor. What is really the definition of medical malpractice? How do you determine whether you have been treated not well by a doctor?
Well, I think really it starts for the patient while they're still a patient. You have to ask these doctors a lot of questions. You have to demand answers from them that you can understand. Using this case for an example, these parents, that's why they went to a lawyer. They asked a lot of questions and it didn't make sense. What they were being told just did not make sense to them. And that's why they came to us.
You generally find that to be true too, right?
Oh, sure. In fact, that's not only why they came to us, it's why most people come to us. Their lives have been ruined. They don't know why. They can't get straight answers from the hospital or from the doctors who have cared for them. So they look to us for finding answers.
You know, there's also the side of people saying that a lot of lawyers file frivolous lawsuits in medical malpractice cases. Your law firm gets significant results because the facts are there. As lawyers, what do you look for in a good medical malpractice case before you take it on?
Well, first and foremost, you look to see if there is a real injury that we can make a difference about. Mm-hmm. Can we help this family? When you see that, that makes you want to find the answers as to what went wrong.
Right.
Well, I think also it's these people who have problems that they have no way of solving look to us for solutions. But we are consulted by at least 1,200 people a year about potential cases and don't accept more than 10 or 15 new cases a year.
Well, thank God you exist. You have the experience, the medical experience, as well as the legal experience, because folks out there watching this show, if they have a problem with their doctor, they'll probably be contacting you. And I want to thank both of you for spending time with us today on this show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.